Good morning, everyone. This episode is entitled, How Does the Syriac Sinaiticus of 1896 edition prove the virgin birth was also not originally in Luke? The sub-question we have here, what do the subtle changes in the NKJV's Greek source translation, so we're going to go through the NKJV translation today of passages in just the opening chapters of Luke, and obviously it's a Greek at its source, it's translating Greek, but where did that Greek come from? Okay. And what we'll see is it's presumably this a Syriac original edition. And we're looking at that Syriac original edition, and you can see the changes between the two of them are going from the Syriac into a Greek that is trying to accommodate a new edition, a new change, which is the virgin birth. So that's how you can tell which came first. And then just to let you see, as scholars have seen this for some time. Westcott was a famous scholar around the turn of the 1900s, and he wrote about this. And this is a quote of his from his book called Survey of the Canon in an article by Mr. Hastings, and that was at page 238 of Westcott's book, Survey of the Canon. And this is what Westcott says in recognition of what these discoveries meant. I think that the various facts of the case are adequately explained by supposing that versions of separate books of the New Testament were first made and used in Palestine, perhaps within the Apostolic Age, and that shortly afterwards they were collected, revised, and completed at Edessa. Edessa is the capital of Syriac languages, and so this was a kingdom that became a home and safety zone for Christians, the early church, the Ebion in particular. This was where they went. So we have the proof when you read the Syriac Sinaiticus. I'm going to show you here a comparison we're going to do, just a brief preview of it, and you'll see what I'm doing is going to help you see which edition came first. What I'm going to do to help you make your own decision that this edition here, the Sinai, it's also called the Syriac or the Sinaitic palimpsest, that was the original name, but now it's known as the Syriac Sinaiticus. So we're going to compare the NKJV edition, this is from 1982, with the 1896 edition of Agnes Lewis's work, The Four Gospels from the Syriac, okay? And beginning at page 50 will be the Gospel of Luke. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to scroll down. I'm going to show you some comparisons and changes and additions and so on, and that'll help you see which edition came first, okay? All right, so let me just back up a little bit and tell you why I'm doing this episode. Is a commentator named Children of Light. He was confused. He was confusing the Codex Greek Sinaiticus of 1859 found by Tischendorf with the Syriac Sinaiticus of 1896. These are two different languages. So I just want to show you what the issue is that he had, and maybe many of you are having the same issue. Your video states that this Syriac Sinaiticus, Matthew and Luke do not have a virgin birth, but I just went online to the PDF site and the virgin birth story is still there. Please explain, is there a difference between what the two English women discovered in 1892 and what Tischendorf discovered in 1859? So he is thinking that he's looking at something called the Sinaiticus. It has the virgin birth. No one disputes that the Greek Sinaiticus has it, right? But the question is, what is the Syriac? He doesn't realize Syriac is a different language than was what the Codex Greek Sinaiticus was in. So these are two different documents. So this is how I wrote it back. Hi, child. I suspect that you think that the word Sinaiticus, in common between Tischendorf's discovery of the Codex Sinaiticus and the 1890s discovery of the Syriac Sinaiticus by Agnes Lewis, means these are the same document. However, the Tischendorf document is a later document only in Greek, while the Syriac Sinaiticus is in a Hebrew tongue called Syriac and is much earlier and an archaic version of the Gospels from an earlier epoch, demonstrably, especially from how the virgin birth account was evidently squeezed into the Greek text, which is what we're going to show you today, which requires numerous subtle small changes, which we're going to show you today, that all had to be made to the stream existent later in the Codex Sinaiticus in Greek that Tischendorf found. The word Sinaiticus only means that each of these two works was found in the deserts of Sinai. Otherwise, these two works are distinct and separate, particularly due to the complete absence of the virgin birth in the earlier form, which the Syriac Sinaiticus represents. Due to your question, I last night did a close comparison between the NKJV, which has a fairly high consistency, the Codex Greek Sinaiticus of Tischendorf, and the Syriac Sinaiticus found later of an even earlier four gospel set than Tischendorf's discovery. Blessings, Doug. Okay, so I hope that actually synopsizes what you're going to see here And it's very important for you to make your own decisions about how you should you perceive the Syriac Sinaiticus more authoritative. And the answer is yes. And one of the reasons there it's not been more popularized is because we have a prejudice. We don't want to hear anything that says the virgin birth is not true. And the dramatic difference between that version and this version. But you'll see when I show it to you side by side, you go, okay, I can see it now. And that's what I hope you'll make your own decision. I'm just going to present it to you as we go. All right, so here we have on the left is the Gospel of Luke, NKJV, meaning the King James Version of the Bible with updated language. So this goes all the way back to the manuscripts that Erasmus was using in the 11th, from dating from the 11th and 12th century, which then later became known as the Textus Receptus, his assembly of it. And that work is this 1982 edition versus the 1896 edition of the Four Gospels of Agnes Lewis, as we previously introduced. So let's just take a look at it. And I've highlighted in yellow those things that are of some significant differences. Now you can immediately see a bias in this first translation. So let's listen to the Syriac Sinaiticus first. It seemed good to me, Luke is writing, also, who have investigated all these things from the beginning, to write of them one by one carefully unto you, most noble Theophilus. Okay? Now, watch what it sounds like in the NKG. It seemed good to me also, same as in the Syriac, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account. What is going on here? Oh, it had to be changed to perfect because even though he's claiming he's relying upon eyewitnesses, here he says eyewitnesses, right? And ministers of the word. And he says that also here, he relied on eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. That's true. But if you don't have perfect understanding, this might be deemed not as reliable. So you can see which way is this being corrupted. This is the corruption over here, right? Because that fits a later agenda to make this more authoritative than even Luke was trying to be. Luke is writing a judge. That's what the conclusion is. It's a way of addressing people that would be appropriate for talking to a person who is a magistrate judge assistant to Nero, who Paul is on appeal. When this book of Luke is being written concurrently with the book of Acts, both of which are going to Theophilus, and the scholarship now shows that this is likely for the appeal that Paul had made to Nero. And the book of Acts ends with the waiting for 2 more years, the appeal, in front of Caesar. But anyway, you can see which direction this went, right? It's not, this is the original on the right. This is the agenda-driven change to add the word perfect, which there is nothing about that. It says, who have investigated all these things from its beginning. Nothing about being perfect. And then it matches up. Who have investigated all these things, to write of them of one carefully unto thee, and then you have it to write an orderly account. Okay, so that's how you can tell which way this is going already from the very first corruption. Okay, and the very first difference shows a corrupt intent. Of course, a benign one, right? We just want people to trust Luke even more. That's not your purpose as a translator is never to add words to serve a religious agenda. Just tell the people what the document said. That would have been the right thing to do. Let's continue to scroll down. Now, John's birth announcement, John the Baptist's birth announcement, virtually there's no differences. Very minor issues, okay? And but here's where the virgin birth account originally was. So, by the way, after I did all this and I didn't see the virgin birth account mentioned on the right side, I literally did an AI search, artificial intelligence search. I just simply asked Google, where in the book of Luke is the virgin birth account? And this is the answer I got. The account of the virgin birth of Jesus in the Bible is in Luke 1, verses 26 to 38. So you have 10 verses that are missing, that are not related to the virgin birth, but then you have verses 26 to 38 entirely not present. Okay, now you have to know that even though she's adding verse numbers, see these verse numbers, they're not originally there. All of this is added to help give you and I reference points. So there is no way she can say or know whether the verses were there originally. If they're not there, they're just not there. And that's meaning the virgin birth account is not in the book of Luke in the Syriac Sinaiticus. So why would that be influential? Because what's the benefit? Who benefits by adding virgin birth? the pagan Christians, because that's what they believe. They believe their God, many of their gods are sons of God who are divine from birth because they were born from a virgin. And that became an imperative later in time, particularly with the Gnostics, because they wanted to make Jesus into a super demigod, so to speak. All right, so if we go all the way down and we get to chapter 2, verse 25, the first thing we see that's a variant that I think is interesting is it says here in verse 25, now there was a certain man in Jerusalem, his name was Simeon, righteous he was and just. This says Simeon, and this man was just and devout. What's going on here? Who says there's none righteous? Oh, Paul. So this is a pro-Paul deletion. Get rid of that, and it just says was just and devout. Okay, just continue. All right, so let's go down to the next one. We have, and his father and mother wondered at those things which were spoken of him about Jesus. Father and mother, very normal if you don't have a virgin birth. But what if you have a virgin birth where Joseph isn't really the father? You're going to change it. See over here, verse 33. So this is the NKJV. The corruption is to add or remove the word father and just say Joseph and his mother, as if they're two different roles. One's just a standby person who doesn't have any role as father, and the other is the actual mother instead of father and mother. So which do you think, which direction does this go? So we already showed you the very first page, the very first lines of Luke fit the change in the corruption is going from taking the left side and changing it in what the additions you're seeing in the NKJV. So this should be the corrupt side. This follows the same pattern, which is father and his mother are innocuous terms normally, but if you have adding a virgin birth account, it no longer is desirable to leave it there because that would imply Joseph was the father of Jesus. But that means this corruption means they know that the word father and mother had that significance for you and me, that we need to know the father of Jesus for the purpose of the fulfillment of 2 Samuel is that Jesus has to have a male lineage descendant from David, not Mary. It has to go through the father, not the mother. And we showed you that's what the Jewish scholars pointing to their own Torah tell you. So that's why we are dumb Gentiles. And whoever made this change, adding the virgin birth for corrupt pagan reasons, didn't care and didn't know about this rule about the Torah. You don't count the line through the mother, you count it through the father. Let's continue to go on here. Now, a lot of the changes are minor, but here we have Joseph and Mary when they had fulfilled in the temple on the firstborn. There was a rule about a firstborn, which you have to do with the firstborn. So instead of it saying Joseph and Mary, it now says they. Why not say Joseph and Mary? But again, it maybe makes them feel uncomfortable to even recognize that Joseph exists. So saying the word they is better, I guess. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Parents, that seems pretty innocuous, his parents. But that doesn't work in a virgin birth world, right? So look what happens is you've got to get rid of it. It's Joseph and his mother. Joseph and his mother means that this is where the corruption is. So this is major corruption number 2 for the virgin birth account. Okay, so that's just showing you how you can detect them. Same thing here. Parents, this is, now where are we? So we know where we are. This should be chapter 2, right? Chapter 2, right? We're all in chapter 2. These are all chapter 2 corruptions. So let's make sure we know the verses that we're talking about. This is verse 44. 2, verse 44. Joseph and his mother seems totally natural to everyone else, but that's not what it was there originally. Now let's go on again. Same thing in verse 48. It says, translation go, why would you use the word parents? Why not use the word parents over here? This is not what you want to call them if you have a virgin birth world over here. So this is your third corruption for the virgin birth. Then this is interesting, though. They kept this one. Behold, thy father and I were seeking you. And here it still says father. So that they're not always consistent. Let's go on. Now, what's also interesting, and this is not a virgin birth issue, it's just simply a unique statement that Jesus makes only in the Syriac Sinaiticus. Jesus says, he said unto them, why were you seeking me? Wouldst you not that I must be with my father? I think that means in Old English or whatever, do you not know that I must be with my father? So why Jesus is this young child? He's 12 years old. He's wandered into the temple, and the parents left the town. They didn't realize they're missing their son Jesus till they had to come all the way back. And then Jesus says, "Why don't you know that I have to be about my Father's work?" But actually, here he says, don't you know I have to be with my Father?" So it was so interesting. Now, watch what it turns out into. I would say it's corruption, but it's not a virgin birth corruption. "Why do you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business instead of be with my Father?" And that could be a kind of a Trinitarian corruption over here on the left, because being with my Father would suggest that Jesus is not already with his Father. To be with his Father, he wants to be at the temple. And so the temple is not dwelling in him yet. And that fits also the fact in the original version of the baptism of Jesus in these Gospels, or in the Gospels in general, was that the baptism is where the Father came to dwell in Jesus. And that was what it originally said. But of course, that had to be corrupted after the Trinity doctrine. But that's a whole nother issue. And I have videos on that if you're interested. But now, here's another interesting thing. In the article, Horace Hastings, he's going to tell you Luke 3:23 has been translated as follows: but Jesus, about being 30 years old, called as he was a son of Joseph. And he's saying this is in the Syriac Sinaiticus. And I just need to tell you, there were three other people with Agnes Lewis who came back, and one of them, Burkitt, wrote his own translation of portions of, in fact, he put in footnotes, of the Syriac Sinaiticus. So I believe that's where this comes from. Okay, so Burkitt has this version, but now I just want to show you how it's been translated by Agnes Lewis. Now, remember, she's a pastor's wife for many years. Her husband died. She inherited all this money from her family. She becomes interested in doing biblical archaeology. Her and her sister go to Cambridge. They're very rich. They're able to get the top education in the world in Syriac language. They thought, hey, let's do something different than Tischendorf does. And they did. And oops, that got them to the oldest text. That's not what they were looking for. And so what is a pastor's wife going to do with this? Let's read how she translates this passage, verse 23. "And Jesus, when he was about 30 years old, as he was called the son of Joseph." Now listen to the difference between the two of these. "As he was called the son of Joseph," and then the lineage begins. Okay, so this is important. How did he start? Did he start as a son of Joseph, or was just merely called the son of Joseph? If you read it in the apparently Burkitt version, it's he was called as he was a son of Joseph, which would be affirming he is a son of Joseph, and he's also called the son of Joseph. So both realities would still exist. But if you just move the words just a little bit around, "as he was called the son of Joseph," now it's the same words, but different punctuation, and the word "called" is put into a different place. It's, instead of being earlier in the sentence, Agnes Lewis puts it later in the sentence. So you get this change from Burkitt, called as he was the son of Joseph, you get he was called the son of Joseph. Anyway, I don't think we should be influenced by Agnes Lewis. Burkitt is a top dog translator. He knows Syriac because his whole thing is paleography, paleontology. I got to get it right. Paleography, which means he knows how things were written. And if he's a specialist on this assignment, it was because he was a specialist in Syriac. He has to know how these words really fit together. And so his work, we need to actually compare. It's called the Curated on Syriac Sinaiticus and the Palimpsest, which is her Agnes Lewis work. So he's a second commentary source we need to look at, and he puts it in his footnotes, just so you know. And same thing here in the 18. So I wanted to show you this is the 1894 edition. I double checked. Did anything change in 1896? She did the same thing here, and as he was called the son of Joseph. But anyway, it's still, this is not the virgin birth account where it says this. This is what it now reads in your NKJV. Being as was supposed the son of Joseph. So here it's just a mere supposition. Over here, that's not clear. You can be called something and it doesn't mean you're not actually that. You're called the son of Joseph. He was called the son of, just so you know, in maybe I need to explain this. Whenever you hear the word Bar, Jonah, or something like that, that Bar word means son of Joseph. And your name, your legal name, would be Jesus bar Joseph. So if I said Jesus was called the son of Joseph, it would not surprising in an Hebraic culture, because that means as he was born, he was now called Jesus bar Joseph. See? And I'll give you another example. Do you remember when Pilate offers the crowd at the crucifixion to either release Barabbas or release Jesus? The crowd picks Barabbas, but we're never told or explained. Barabbas means Bar Rabbis, meaning son of the rabbi. So his name is not Barabbas. His name is son of the rabbi. Same thing here. Jesus would be known as, he would be called Jesus Bar Joseph. And that's all this is saying. So it's neutral as to the issue of the virgin birth. He could be called that if he had a virgin birth, or he would be called that anyway if he had a normal birth. So this doesn't impact that issue, but I thought I'd bring it to your attention. And also you can see Burkitt translated it differently. Apparently it was Burkitt who translated it differently. Now, before I let you go, I want to just give you some reminders about proofs on this issue of the virgin birth. We showed you last time the Syriac Sinaiticus. This book reads, quote, Jacob begat Joseph. That's the father of Joseph. Joseph, to whom was espoused the Virgin Mary, begat Jesus, who is called the Christ. And then Epiphanius in Panarion 30 says this in the mid-300s. For this, the Ebion said that Christ was conceived by sexual intercourse and the seed of a man, Joseph. The Nazarenes I've spoken about came from Ebion and was connected with them. Panarion and Epiphanius, 2009, volume 1, at page 131 to 32. So this is in the mid-300s. The Ebion are up in arms, incidentally, about the virgin birth being added to the Greek, added in a Greek edition. They had the Hebrew edition, and they're saying this is not how our book reads. They hired Syriac, a top expert in Hebrew to Greek translation. He said that's not correct, and there was no prophecy of a virgin birth in Isaiah 7:14. They specifically wanted Syriac to make that clear, and other top scholars of Judaism had already translated that word not as virgin but as young maiden. And I already talked to you about this version of Luke 3:23, as he was called, as he was a son of Joseph. He was called Bar Joseph. And here's Burkitt, the fellow who also went and did the Sinai translations, and they were known at that time because they were not yet formally called the Syriac Sinaiticus. They were called the Sinai Palimpsest, and so it was in Syriac, and that's what it was called at that time. And the Curetonian version was a later edition of the same, a similar Syriac, but in a later edition, which is post virgin birth. Okay, so it has virgin birth in it, but he's also comparing it to the work he found, along with Agnes Lewis, in that St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. Now, I wanted to show you, he provides this example of proof that the idea that Joseph begat Jesus was a early phenomenon in the church. Joseph begat Jesus right in the dialogue of Timothy and Aquila. And this is a screenshot from his book, page 265. And now he's quoting a work by Justin Martyr, who died in 165, called Dialogue of Timothy and Aquila. It was a work produced, F.C. Cornevere produced it from Oxford, 1898. And it says this, in this dialogue, Matthew 1, verse 16 is quoted 3 times. Okay, and then one of the 3 times it says, there's a dialogue between Trypho and a Jew. It's actually another edition here. There were more than one book in which this occurred. One was in Timothy and Aquila, and the other was in the dialogue with Trypho the Jew. The Jew says this, there is a genealogy in the Old Testament and in the New, that there is one in Matthew, and it runs thus. This is in this book by a guy who dies in 165. Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, from whom was born Jesus, that is called Christ. That sounds exactly like what we saw in the Syriac Sinaiticus. And so Joseph begat Jesus and is called Christ, about whom we are talking. It says he begat him from Mary. There you go. That's matter-of-factly stated by a guy who dies in 165. So that's why I say you can infer from this alone, number one, that the virgin birth was unknown, because definitely Justin Martyr, he's one of the most prolific writers. He has the text and quotes the Gospels, the gospel, principally, apparently, the Gospel of Matthew, but it's so similar to our gospel that we currently have of Matthew, you see no variance. Okay, so he has the same subtext Bible, and he's writing in Greek. So the Greek text has already been produced, but it doesn't have a virgin birth yet, and that's how come it sounds just like this. And now, if you're just curious, what work that Burkitt is relying upon here, it's this work, The Dialogues of Athanasius and Zacchaeus, and of Timothy and Keela. He cites it, he gives it to 1898. Here is the text I just showed you from his page 265. This is page 76 from the Conybeare work. And if you know Greek, you'd see the words on the page. Now, I want to give you another reference. J.R. Wilkinson, a renowned Christian scholar of his day, in his article, Mr. Conybeare, Textual Theories, Hibbert Journal, and the one from 1904 at page 354 reads at page 358, the reading of Sinaiticus, presumably is what he meant, Joseph, to whom was betrothed Mary the Virgin, begat Jesus, who was called the Christ, is clearly due to mixture of the Western text with the reading of the original genealogy. He means there's some mixture, he thinks, with the Western text of a virgin birth because it says the word virgin. I don't know that that's necessarily true. Of course, you would have if your wife is virgin, when you marry her, you would say a virgin gave birth to this. Not that she had a virgin birth. That would be unique. Okay. So anyway, but that's what he said. It carries us back to the early days when the canonical gospel was competing with the source or sources from which it was derived. We have here perhaps a conscious corruption of the canonical text, for we find that in the Syriac Sinaiticus agrees with the famous old Latin manuscript in omitting the words was basically before they came together. So these words are not there. This is no virgin birth. And you can see in the famous old Latin text, these words are also omitted. The reading of the Syriac Sinaiticus at 125 of Matthew here is, he took his wife and she bore to him a son and he called his name Jesus. The reading of Timothy and Aquila is, as Spindle says, a confluence from the Textus Receptus and the original genealogy, Joseph begat Jesus. So you actually have two works by Timothy and Aquila and also the Tryphon the Jew that both talk about Joseph begat Jesus. Similarly, in Luke 2, verses 41 to 42, Mary says to Jesus that she and your father were worried when they lost track of him. Would Mary think to call Joseph Jesus' father unless he truly were? Right. So would Mary lie to Joseph? Would Mary lie to her son Jesus and say your father is Joseph when he isn't? I don't think so. And that's important. So she's herself admitting that your father is Joseph, my husband. That's what she's saying. All right. And now this is, again, just to remind you of how Burkitt's role in all this. He was one of the people who went there to get the Syriac palimpsest, and he includes a translation of it in his footnotes to his own work of the Curatone Gospels, which are a different set of Gospels, but they're also in Aramaic. And this is his translation of the key verse. Let me point out, it ends with the letter S, so he's telling you it's in the Syriac Sinaiticus. Jacob begat Joseph. Joseph, to whom was betrothed Mary, the Virgin, begat Jesus, that is called the Messiah. And here in this episode, I've shown you several corruptions that obviously were designed to make the virgin birth more not conflicted with what originally was present, where it was talking about parents and father, Joseph, your dad, your father, Joseph, is looking for you, Jesus, and so on and so forth. So we have a mounting case that in order to defend Christ and his messiahship, you have to prove he satisfies 2 Samuel 7 that he be of the seed of David, which in Jewish law, the Torah, has to be counted due to the book of Numbers from the father's house, not from the mother's. All right. God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.